special edition of India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're coming to you from inside Hyderabad. This city is trying to position itself as the aerospace capital of India, and that's why Boeing has decided to hold its first large global suppliers meeting right here. 135 Boeing suppliers, 45 of their partners like GE, Honeywell, across 12 different countries right here in Hyderabad to talk about the Make in India opportunity. We'll get you all of that and more in just a minute on India Business Hour. But first, let's go across to Kritika for the top stories of the day. Kritika.
Well, Shreen, lots of action lined up for you. So here are the headlines.
We are still accommodative.
No Christmas goodies from Raghuran Rajan. RBI holds base rates as expected. Says the bank is vigilant on inflation, but its stance remains accommodative. Nudges banks once again to ease interest rates further.
What we're trying to do is work on this, on the bank balance sheets with the banks, so that we have a finite period over
Governor
which the
Rajan
bank
lays out
balance
his
sheets are
blueprint to clean up the balance sheets of banks. Says banks will have to get their act together by the end of FY17. That's an exclusive. Volkswagen recalls over 3 lakh diesel cars in India. Sources say the emission regulator found evidence of cheat software in cars sold in India. Another exclusive. The Enforcement Directorate raids a slew of firms allegedly linked to former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram's son Karthi Chidambaram in connection to the SL Max's case. Chidambaram denies links to any firms, dares the government to act against him, and terms the raids as a malicious onslaught. Heads of 190 nations are in a huddle in Paris to finalize a deal to cut down on carbon emissions. This, even as China feels the impact of greenhouse gases, with industrial activity coming to a standstill for the 4th consecutive day on account of smog. No festive cheer for Motown in November. Maruti, Royal Enfield and Ashok Leyland post disappointing sales numbers, but M&M bucks the trend thanks to a strong tractor sales. Lambani is all set to exit the telecom tower business. Sources say a deal to sell Reliance Infratel expected this week. The company's enterprise valuation pegged at a whopping 22,000 crore rupees, nearly another exclusive.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be known as call drop minister. Sorry. I'm being very clear about it. And I will drive it very, very categorically.
Telecom Minister lashes out at the industry over call drops once again. Says the centre has done its job and no telecom companies need to do theirs.
Of the rainfall and flooding the city has had to deal with a major civic crisis. Sinkholes like these have formed in several parts of the IT corridor and in South Chennai. In fact, Metro Water officials here have been dealing with the issue on a war footing. This sinkhole, in fact, developed late last evening. It's caused a major issue to traffic in the area. Remember, this is Madhya Kailash Junction.
For the 16th time in 18 days, schools in Chennai have remained shut because of the rain battering the city. Roads, in fact, in the city have caved in. We'll get you a ground report of just how tough things are in the city of Chennai, but that's coming up for you in just a bit on India Business Hour. For now, let's bring you the latest action from the Lal Street with Kritika. Kritika, well, Governor Rajan failing to surprise this time around.
Absolutely, but Shreen, that did not have an impact on the markets. The RBI status quo policy did not have any impact on the Lal Street, since the Nifty was stuck in a very narrow band and ended the day comfortable with marginal gains. The 8,000 mark doesn't seem far away. Sensex also saw some minor gains as it continues to hold its head above that 26,000 mark. Mid-caps punched above their weight once again, and that index ended with handsome gains of nearly 1%. But Shireen, the top story, of course, has to be the Governor Rajan.
Well, absolutely, and that is the big exclusive as well on CNBC TV 18 tonight. Now, he was generous in September when he front-loaded those rate cuts, 50 basis points, surprising the street. But Governor Rajan stuck to the script today and remained a status quo policy from the Reserve Bank of India. CNBC TV 18's Banking Bureau tells you that Governor Rajan is vigilant but continues to be accommodative. Here are the highlights of the credit policy.
Actually, the statement says when, but you now said if and when space for accommodation opens. I just want to know if that means something more.
You know, one of the dangers of doing nothing is then you start parsing every word. I think the statement reflects a fair amount of deliberation, and so that represents our stance.
With those words, the governor rightly summed up the no action, no impact policy. The rate cut was front-loaded in September. Couple that with the looming Fed rate hike and the impact of the 7th pay commission on the wage bill. These three reasons meant that not a single banker or market watcher was expecting any action according to the CNBC TV 18 poll. The surprise was that there was no surprise. However, Rajan said the RBI will remain in an accommodative mode.
First, we are still accommodative. I think that is very clear.
Besides his own accommodative stance, the governor said that the interest rates will fall when banks are forced to calculate base rates as per their marginal cost of funds. RBI is also working with the government to link small savings rates with the market rates. Rajan added that he expects more lending as banks clean up their balance sheets.
We hope that over the span of the next year, I want to put something like March 2017 on the table as when we hope that a full cleanup will have been done.
This deadline that by March 2017 he wants the balance sheets of banks cleaned up seems to be actually the most concrete takeaway from the monetary policy. On the policy itself, although the governor reiterated that he will be accommodative, the fact that he will look at the quality of fiscal consolidation and that he is worrying about the rise in non-food, non-fuel inflation, or basically services inflation, gives the feeling that there is really very little scope for accommodation. Probably one more cut is what most economists are guessing.
The governor's statement did sound a note of caution on three issues. 1. The rise in services inflation for 3 consecutive months. 2. The likelihood of a below-normal Rabi crop. And 3. The impact of the 7th Pay Commission's recommendations on rents and wages. The governor and his deputy hedged their bets.
We don't feel there will be a significant effect on aggregate demand, provided, of course, you maintain the fiscal path. Of course, investment in some ways may be higher quality than certain kinds of spending, and therefore one would hope that you would uncover space elsewhere for the public investment which we really need. And I think the government has taken a number of these into account while anticipating the consequences of the pay commissions.
One impact that will be felt through the CPI index would be via the house rental allowance. But that's a one-time level change, and unless there are wider externalities, we will most likely look through that.
With Lata Venkatesh and Ritu Singh, in Mumbai, Alexander Matthew.
And now for that promised exclusive, Lata Venkatesh caught up with Raghuran Rajan right after he announced the monetary policy. He says that though recommendations made by the 7th Pay Commission have had an impact on inflation dynamics, he is confident that it may trend lower than RBI's estimates in the near term at least.
From when we made the estimates in September to now, what has generally happened is the information that's come in has caused us to reduce our expectations of inflation, the information that has come in. Then there are risks going forward which tend to elevate our estimates, risks such as the pay commission, for example, and the evolution of food prices post 2 tough monsoons. So in general, I would say that if you look at our curve, it's broadly in the same place it was as in September, with a slight bias towards the downside. That's what's in the policy statement.
The incremental information gives you a sense of lower inflation for what period? Along the curve or only for January 2016?
No. So certainly for the near term, it gives us a greater sense of where we will be. But what I'm also saying is that we had in mind some of these risks that we've highlighted here. To some extent, if you think that pulses have been more persistent over the last few months than one thought, that has been offset by the realization over the last couple of months of inflation slightly below where we expected it to be. So it's in that sense that some of the information has come in lower. Plus, if you look at oil prices going forward, that also gives a certain amount of comfort that it has stayed relatively low, because we have to see what OPEC does.
But if you take your comments on services inflation, non-food, non-fuel inflation, as well as to it, impulses from GST, 7th Pay Commission, would you be? I mean, are you still reiterating 4.8% in January of 2017?
Well, it's in the ballpark of that number. I'm not sure that I would say exactly 4.8%, but
not 5.4.
No. Otherwise, we'd be somewhat off where we intend to be. I think of the factors you mentioned, such as the pay commission, some of the factors are going to be balanced by government action. Of course, the additional outlay has to be balanced by an appropriate, finding space so that the fiscal sort of deficit targets aren't breached.
Well, that's the Governor Rajan exclusive interview here on CNBC TV 18, and you can catch more of that right here on the channel. But let's talk about a story that we broke on CNBC TV 18 a few weeks ago, and today it is official. Volkswagen will recall over 3 lakh cars in India. In fact, the study that was conducted in India, or the investigation, has now revealed that Volkswagen did fit its cars in India with cheat devices as well. Ron Banerjee is standing by to take us through the details of those findings and also what it now means as far as Volkswagen is concerned. Ron, will they have to pay monetary penalty as well?
That's a big question, Shri. In fact, I'm just going to come to that. But before that, we must underscore for our viewers that this is the largest ever recall in India. The previous highest was 2.1 lakh vehicles that were recalled by Honda sometime back. This clearly, the 3.24 lakh figure clearly dwarfs the 2.2 lakh that was recalled by Honda. Secondly, the report is pretty much on expected lines, because earlier, as as CNBC TV 18 had reported in the first week of November, that the draft ARI report had indeed confirmed that there were that there were cheat software that were installed in the EA189 engines, following which Volkswagen was issued a notice, and thereafter the company was given time till the 30th of November to respond to that notice. And in the meanwhile, the draft report that ARI had prepared, they were now going to submit a final report to the government, and basically the final report that was submitted today more or less confirms it. In fact, there was a meeting that took place today between Volkswagen officials, the Ministry of Heavy Industry and Ministry of Roads and Transport. Now, what is important and something, and just to come to your question, Shireen, about monetary compensation, what is interesting is that the press statement that the company issued some time back, more or less confirming the information that we put out a couple of hours ago, even the number, but they say that cars that were manufactured between 2008 and November 2015 will be recalled, and there are 3.23 lakh of these vehicles. Now the question is, today is the 1st of December, so the vehicles that were manufactured yesterday, that is the 30th of November, will be recalled. Now the question that Volkswagen really needs to answer for is that even after the scandal broke, was the company still manufacturing these vehicles fitted with the same EA189 engines that had the cheat software? And clearly also the government did not come out with any monetary compensation. They said a decision will be taken. But if you were to ask me, if the company is coming out on record and saying we will recall, there is tacit admission by the company that they indeed did fit their engines with cheat software, then the question arises, why wasn't a decision on compensation also taken today, considering the fact that all stakeholders were there? Last week, South Korea had recalled vehicles, Volkswagen's vehicles, and those were only 1.24 lakh vehicles. That is almost 1/3 of what India recalled. But they had also imposed a penalty of $13 million. In this case, the government has not taken a decision on that. We really hope and sincerely that a decision is taken on compensation, because 3.24 lakh is a staggering figure.
Well, that it certainly is. But Ron, a very quick second question to you. As part of the probe that's been going on to Volkswagen and the petitions that are being filed, for instance, at the NGT, there has been a clamor now that this probe should extend to all other manufacturers as well. When I say probe, I mean look at what is happening as far as emissions are concerned with other manufacturers. Do you get any sense that we are going to see now a retesting, so to speak?
Well, yes, Shireen. I mean, that is something that the government, is saying, that in terms of sort of strengthening the emission testing process. But remember, the same questions were also asked, when the GM scam broke about a year and a half back. And at that point in time, the government did put in place a sort of another layer of scrutiny, wherein the government can come, ARAI officials can come, and they can pick up any vehicles from the road and take it to the testing lab to sort of gauge whether the manufacturer has tinkered with the emission standards. So purely on that count, India is actually, surprisingly far more stringent when it comes to sort of doing the due diligence as far as the emission standards and emission sort of testing is concerned. But clearly, once the new motor vehicle bill, which is pending in the parliament, that gets passed, they actually have they have a section alone that specifically talks about how vehicles should be tested. So a lot of that will depend, of course, when parliament clears that bill, but as far as testing emissions and testing for emissions is concerned, a large part of that has already been taken care of.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Lots of questions which hopefully should be answered in the next coming months. Thanks for joining in with that. But moving on, trouble for former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram's son, Karti Chidambaram. The Enforcement Directorate and the Income Tax Department are conducting raids on firms alleging that they are related to Karti Chidambaram. The Enforcement Directorate conducted raids at the Vasan Eye Care Centre in Chennai. The agency had filed a case against Karti Chidambaram for money laundering in connection with the SL Maxis case. In fact, former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram issued a statement earlier today saying, and I quote now, "If the government wishes to target me, they should do so directly, not harass friends of my son who carry on their own business and have nothing to do with politics." End quote. He goes on to say, and I quote him again, "We have made it clear repeatedly that no member of my family has any equity or economic interest in any of the firms that are being targeted. I condemn the attempt to link them to my son and harass them on that ground." And of course, so Shireen, lots of action back home, but there was also a lot of action in overseas as well.
Well, that's right, but this is going to be a tough one, Kritika. This could perhaps also be a spanner in the works as far as the negotiations on the GST is concerned. Remember, we had just about seen talks starting to warm up between the Congress party and the BJP. So let's see what this leads to finally. But let's talk about what's happening in Paris at COP21. Now, 2015 is going to be the hottest year that we've ever seen. In fact, since 1998, every year we've actually seen temperatures rising. And that doesn't bode well as far as the climate is concerned and for any of us. In fact, the glaciers are melting in the Arctic Ocean. Now, let's talk about what can be done and what leaders at COP21 in Paris are committing to do. Not just money, but also government support and government machinery behind the efforts to try and alleviate the pain being faced by planet Earth at this point in time. So here are the highlights of the headlines coming in from COP21.
Nearly 150 global leaders meeting in Paris have reached some key deals to tackle climate change. Headline agreements include a $1 trillion plan by India and France to make solar energy more affordable in developing nations. 20 countries, including the U.S., China, and India, have vowed to double their existing $10 billion in spending towards renewable energy.
Indeed, and Norway, Germany and the US say they'll commit $5 billion over the next 5 years to help reduce deforestation, while the Nordic countries have unveiled a $500 million plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, more than 30 countries, led by Sweden and New Zealand, have called for an end to fossil fuel subsidies. So those are some of the headlines in the first day of this crucial meeting at COP21. Nothing truly groundbreaking yet.
In fact, Steve Sedgwick, who is in Paris as we speak, joins in now with the latest action from that climate change summit. Steve, what's the one big takeaway from day 2 at the summit?
Day 2 of COP21 talks in Paris, and the focus was on President Obama. The president, before he left the country, had 2 key issues to address. One was the Middle East tension, and he mentioned his meeting with President Erdogan of Turkey, saying he tried to de-escalate the situation, de-escalate the tension between Russia and Turkey. The president also mentioning he felt that President Putin could be worked with and understood the process that was going on in Vienna, and that they weren't perhaps too far away in some of their objectives. In terms of climate change, the president said that the US was leading from the front, leading with its deal with China to try and push forward a very successful climate change deal. He said this would be the start rather than the end of the process as well. Of course, the US has offered to lower its carbon emissions compared with 2005 levels by 28%. He also sought potentially to isolate GOP opposition, saying, look, world leaders got it, even the opposition in individual countries to those world leaders got it, global scientists got it, and he also pointed out the extreme weather effects that are going on around the world at the moment as another catalyst to make opposition back home potentially understand his point of view and that of many of the policymakers here in Paris. This is Steve Sedgwick in Paris at the COP21.
Steve Sedgwick there reporting from COP21. And even as the world debates climate change, China is reeling under smog. For the 4th straight day, industries in China have remained shut on account of the smog. Eunice Yoon reports from a very foggy Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, we just had more bad news out of the second largest economy. The official PMI, which is a gauge of manufacturing activity, fell in November and to a 3-year low. This is the worst we've seen for quite some time. And there's also a private survey known as the Caixin Market Index, which also indicated that there was a slight improvement, but still signaling that the manufacturing sector is quite weak. There was a bit of a pickup, according to both of the measures, in external demand, but domestic demand remains lackluster. The services industry did better. It was resilient, but still not enough to really offset some of the declines that we were seeing in the manufacturing and industrial sectors. Now, this all kind of threw some cold water on the party that's been going on here after the Chinese yuan was included in the SDR basket of currencies at the IMF. And not helping matters either in the industrial sector is the fact that China has had to now shut hundreds of factories in northern China to cope with some of the worst pollution that we've seen in quite some time. According to the U.S. Embassy measurements, our air now is 25 times worse than what the WHO deems as hazardous. So some schools have been closed, or children are allowed to skip school today. Also, flights have been canceled. And this, of course, is all going on as the president of China is vowing to take even tougher action on greenhouse gases at the climate change talks in Paris. Guys?
Eunice Yoon there reporting from a very hazy Beijing, and I can tell you that it's not very different in New Delhi. But let's talk about what's happening with automakers. The festive season was expected to bring in good tidings, but auto companies haven't actually met expectations. In fact, they've disappointed. So there were a bunch of launches, and there was, of course, the hope that Diwali, etc., would have kicked sentiment up, but that has not been the case. Sonia joins us now to wrap up the sales data for us. Sonia, disappointing.
Well, yes, for the month of November, things have been a bit slow on the auto sector front. In fact, for all the numbers that came out, the numbers were below expectations. Let me start with Maruti. The total sales growth was 9.7% year-on-year. But if you look at the export growth, it has slowed down all the way to just 1%. And you also had a disappointment in some of their segments, like the mini car segment, which actually fell about 4.7%. For Eicher Motors, the Royal Enfield sales were strong, but below street expectations. So the sales have gone up about 48% year-on-year. they did have some production and dispatch issues at their Chennai plant because of the heavy rainfall that you had there. So that was some localized issue for Eicher Motors. Ashok Leyland as well, sales were well below expectations. The total sales growth was up just 16% and light commercial vehicle sales were up just about 6%. Apart from that, for Ashok Leyland, it has been seeing a moderation in growth post the pre-buying that took place till the 1st of October because of the onset of the new safety regulation. Now for M&M, that one actually looked good this time. So total sales, auto sales were up 21%, while tractor sales were quite strong, up about 42%. So all in all, the numbers were disappointing for most, slightly lower than expectations, but M&M surprised on the upside with a good performance coming in from tractors.
Thanks for that, Sonia. In fact, two-wheeler giants Hero MotoCorp and TVS Motors saw a 0.6% and 2.4% year-on-year rise respectively. So that was in line with what we were expecting, but Tata Motors saw a 7% year-on-year dip in sales, which is disappointing. Moving on to the telecom space. I don't want to be called as the call drop minister. It saddens me that telcos started acting on call drops only after nudging them many times. It was a no-holds-barred speech from the telecom minister Ravi Shankar Prasad, who was speaking at an event organized by the TRAI. He lambasted the telecom operators over call drops. The minister urged them to work harder and come good on the various proposals to ramp up investments and spruce up networks. Meanwhile, Sunil Mittal called for abolition of spectrum caps to help telecom operators combat the very call drop issue.
I have done my duty. The operators must do their duty. And that I am saying very firmly and with full sense of responsibility. While Sunil, I acknowledge your role as the third largest operator of the world. Your company has done a great job. All the other private operators deserve my compliment and good wishes for the great work they have done. I'll speak about it later. But you need to be alive to consumer satisfaction as well. And I regret to say, very frankly, it took a lot of nudging on my side to all of you getting publicly acknowledged that there is a need for improvement. Initial alibi was spectrum is less. There's a need to improve the network, and I compliment you that you are coming with investment proposals. I'm sorry, I don't want to be known as call drop minister. Sorry. I'm being very clear about it. And I will drive it very, very categorically because the country is concerned about it. We are concerned about it.
We have to commend you and Department of Telecom and TRAI that you are reviewing the process of looking at spectrum caps. My own view is 50% in-band spectrum cap, I think, is a good check to have because nobody wants to have the spectrum, entire spectrum in one operator's hands. That takes away robust competition, that takes away development of ecosystem.
I haven't seen the telecom minister being as aggressive as this. I don't want to be called a call drop minister. That's the word coming in from telecom minister Ravi Shankar Prasad. And any argument that telcos put on the table, spectrum shortage, that we're already investing heavily as far as capex and network optimization is concerned, the government is in no mood to listen. That is clearly evident from what Ravi Shankar Prasad had to say this evening. But let's talk telecom, or continue to talk telecom. Anil Ambani may be all set to exit the tower business. Kritika, you've been following that story for a while now. What can we expect and how soon?
Shri, we've been doing this for the last 7 odd years now, so the deal is in the final lap, and I understand that if everything goes as per schedule, the deal will be signed by the end of this week. Now, in terms of the contours, Farallon Capital and Tillman, which are US-based private equity giant, have beaten players like Blackstone and Carlyle to acquire 100% stake. So earlier it was just about to be that 96% stake that Anil Ambani's group company Arcom holds in the Infratel major. But what we understand is that the remaining 4% held by a consortium of PE players will also be sold out altogether, and the valuation now is being pegged at about 21,800 crore rupees. So that makes it the second largest telecom deal within the telecom infrastructure space. Now, in terms of debt reduction, the company is sitting on a debt of around 37,000 crore rupees. So that comes down to 15,000 crore rupees, and that is the clear aim for Arcom. The deal will be completed in about 6 months' time, but once the deal is completed, Arcom and Reliance Infratel, along with the PA players, will work out new terms and will continue with the tenancy agreement, which is crucial for Arcom and RelGeo to look at expanding their 4G base. But moving on from the telecom sector to the oil and gas space, oil and gas consultant DNM, Audie, Golyer and McNaughton submitted their final report to the Oil and Gas Ministry on the KG D6 basin dispute between ONGC and Reliance Industries. DNM, remember, was appointed by the Supreme Court after ONGC claimed that RIL's KG D6 basin, which is situated close to its reserves, may have drawn its gas. According to the PTI, DNM has submitted its report to the DGH. PTI quoting sources says that the report confirms migration of gas from ONGC's KG basin to RIL's KG D6 block. PTI says that the report claims of the 58.68 billion cubic meters of gas produced from KG D6 block since April 1st, 2009, 49.69 BCM belongs to RIL and about 8.981 BCM could have come from ONGC side. PTI says that DNM claims that the volume of gas remaining after this would not be economically viable for ONGC to develop. DNM was jointly appointed by ONGC and RIL to find if the neighbouring fields are connected at all. The government is expected to release the report in the next few days. A standard disclaimer: Reliance Industries owns and operates Network 18 and TV 18, the companies that operate CNBC TV 18.